Hey bookworms, and welcome back to Books and Banter. So today we're doing a deep dive on a book that's gotten a ton of attention.
It's definitely been making the rounds.
Yeah, it has. It's No More Mr. Nice Guy by
Uh,
Dr. Robert Glover.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one.
I know the title might sound a little intense, right?
Yeah, it does kind of make you think, what's this all about?
But I think this deep dive is really for anyone who's ever felt like they're giving too much and not getting enough in return.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
In love, in life, in work, whatever. So to get us started, we've got some excerpts from the book itself.
Oh, cool. So
Right.
we can really get into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. And we've also got a bunch of reader reviews. Some are super positive.
Like raving fans.
Totally. And some are, pretty harsh.
Always interesting to see those different perspectives.
Yeah. So we're going to try to figure out what this book is really all about.
Yeah.
Is it just hype or is there something valuable here?
Yeah, and is it something our listeners should actually check out?
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. Who is this nice guy Glover keeps talking about? Is it just a guy who's, nice?
Well, not exactly. I mean, obviously being nice isn't a bad thing.
Right. Of course not.
But Glover's talking about a specific pattern of a behavior.
Okay. So what does that look like?
Well, he describes a nice guy as someone who's often struggling with people-pleasing, avoiding conflict at all costs.
Always putting other people first.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the catch. These behaviors might seem like they're just about being nice.
But there's more to it.
Right. It can actually stem from deeper issues like insecurity, fear of rejection, or a need for validation from others.
So it's not just about being polite or considerate. It's about these underlying motivations.
Exactly. And those motivations can actually lead to self-sabotage.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Hmm.
And that brings us to what Glover calls the nice guy paradox, right? These individuals, they often end up feeling resentful and taken advantage of.
Yeah, even though they're trying so hard to be nice.
It's like you're doing everything for everyone, but you still feel unappreciated and unfulfilled.
Exactly. And Glover uses some really interesting examples in the book to illustrate this.
Like what?
Well, there's this one story about a guy named Jason. He's constantly doing everything for his wife.
Chores, planning dates, all that.
Yeah, but he feels totally unloved and sexually frustrated, which, can be a common issue for nice guys.
Interesting. So it's like this disconnect between his actions and his feelings.
Right, and that's a classic example of how this nice guy behavior can backfire.
Okay, but couldn't this just be like a communication issue? Maybe Jason's wife just doesn't realize how he's feeling.
That's a good point. And actually, Glover talks about that. He says that while communication is super important in any relationship,
Of course.
nice guys often have trouble expressing their needs directly.
So they're kind of hoping their partner will just figure it out.
Yeah. Or they might just hint at what they want instead of being upfront.
And we all know that rarely works.
Right. So they end up setting themselves up for disappointment.
Makes sense. So we've got the nice guy defined. We've got the paradox. But why do people fall into these patterns in the first place? Like, what's the root of it all?
Well, Glover believes that childhood experiences play a huge role.
Okay, so it's like those early experiences shape how we approach relationships later in life.
Yeah, exactly. He suggests that many nice guys learned early on that it wasn't safe to be themselves or express their needs.
Maybe they had really demanding parents.
Or they were navigating difficult family dynamics, so they learned to suppress their needs in order to keep the peace.
Wow. I never thought about it like that. And then there's that whole idea of toxic shame that Glover talks about, right?
Yes, toxic shame is this deep-seated belief that you're inherently flawed or unworthy.
Like you're not good enough.
Exactly. And that shame can drive a lot of the people-pleasing behavior.
It's like you're constantly trying to prove your worth, but never feeling like it's enough.
Right. And that can lead to all sorts of unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Like what?
Well, Glover talks about things like seeking constant approval from others, hiding perceived flaws.
Avoiding conflict at all costs.
Yeah. Basically anything to avoid feeling that shame.
So it's like building a wall around yourself to protect yourself from rejection.
But that lack of authenticity can actually prevent you from forming deep connections.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
So we've talked about personal experiences, but does Glover also talk about societal influences?
He does. He explores how shifting gender roles might also contribute to this nice guy phenomenon.
Like how society's expectations of men have changed over time.
Exactly. He talks about how during the baby boomer era, there was this shift away from traditional masculinity.
Right, like boys were encouraged to be more sensitive and expressive.
Which is a good thing in theory.
Yeah, of course.
But Glover argues that it may have also led to a generation of men who struggle to assert themselves and set boundaries.
So it's like they're caught between these evolving ideas of masculinity
Mm.
and the patterns they learned in childhood.
Yeah, it's this complex interplay of factors.
This is blowing my mind. So much to unpack here. But I have a question. Is this just a guy thing?
That's a great question. And Glover acknowledges that while the book focuses on men, many of the concepts can apply to anyone.
Because let's be real,
Hmm.
women can struggle with people-pleasing too.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those universal human tendencies, the desire to be loved, the fear of rejection, the struggle to set boundaries.
And understanding how those tendencies can play out in unhealthy ways.
Exactly. And that's what makes this book so relevant, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we can all learn something from it.
Definitely. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get into Glover's practical steps for breaking free from these nice guy patterns.
I'm excited to hear about that, so stay tuned, folks.
Okay, so we just dove deep into like the whole nice guy definition and the paradox and all that.
Yeah, and honestly, it's already making me rethink some of my own patterns.
Right. It's like, wow, this is hitting close to home.
Totally. So where do we go from here? Like, how do we actually break free from this stuff?
Well, that's where the really good stuff comes in. Glover actually gives us a roadmap for change.
Okay, so spill the tea.
Yeah.
What are some of the things he suggests?
Well, one of the first things he talks about is identifying what he calls attachments.
Attachments. What are those?
It's basically anything you use for external validation. You know, like having the perfect car.
Oh, yeah, I get that. Like
Yeah.
you need the fancy car to feel good about yourself.
Or maybe it's the perfect body or the perfect job title, things that make you look good on the outside.
But don't necessarily reflect who you are on the inside.
Exactly. And Glover suggests that these attachments often come from that toxic shame we were talking about earlier.
It's like you're trying to overcompensate for feeling not good enough.
By clinging to these external things.
So how do you break free from these attachments? Do you have to like sell your car and quit your job?
No, not necessarily. It's more about becoming aware of what your attachments are and why you have them.
Okay, so like awareness is the first step.
Yeah. And then you can start gently challenging those beliefs.
So for example, let's say someone's attached to having a perfectly clean house.
Right. Because they think it reflects well on them as a person.
Totally. But maybe they're spending all their time cleaning and stressing out.
So Glover might suggest like, hey, experiment with letting go a little.
Yeah, like don't sweat the small stuff.
Exactly. What happens if you don't make your bed perfectly every day?
Does the world end?
Right. Does anyone actually care? Probably not.
I like that. It's like giving yourself permission to let go of control a little bit.
And as you let go of those external attachments, you create space to connect with what truly matters to you.
Okay, so we're ditching the attachments mentally at least.
Yeah.
What else does Lover recommend?
Well, another big one is self-care.
Oh, that's a good one.
Mm.
I think a lot of people could use more of that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But this can be tricky for nice guys because they're so used to putting everyone else first.
It's like they feel guilty taking time for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So Glover suggests starting small. Just pick one thing that brings you joy.
Like taking a walk, reading a book, whatever.
And schedule it into your day, just like you would an important meeting.
Don't cancel on yourself.
Treat it as a non-negotiable.
I love that. It's like you're retraining your brain to recognize that your needs are important too.
And as you start prioritizing self-care, you'll likely notice a shift in your energy and your mood.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. And this whole self-care thing makes me think about all the times I've said yes to things I didn't really want to do.
You know, just to please someone else.
Exactly, and then I end up feeling resentful and exhausted.
And that resentment can really build up over time, so learning to say no is crucial.
Boundaries, baby.
Yes, it's about setting healthy boundaries and recognizing that you're not responsible for everyone else's happiness.
Oh, that's a hard one. But so important.
It really is.
Yeah.
And speaking of boundaries, Glover also talks about the importance of reclaiming your personal power.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Like, how do you do that?
It's about recognizing that you have the power to make choices in your life.
Instead of feeling like you're at the mercy of other people or circumstances.
Exactly. And it involves things like setting those boundaries we talked about, but also learning to express your feelings honestly and taking responsibility for your own happiness.
So instead of waiting for someone else to make you happy,
You're taking charge of your own life.
that's powerful. And you know, one of the things that really resonated with me in the book was Glover's discussion of the inner critic.
Ugh, Yeah, that voice can be so mean.
It's like it's always there waiting to tear you down.
And Glover actually gives some techniques for quieting that inner critic.
Like what?
Well, it's about becoming aware of those negative thoughts and then challenging them.
Like, wait a minute, is that really true?
Exactly. And then you can start replacing those negative thoughts with more positive and supportive ones.
It's like you're becoming your own best friend.
And that can make a huge difference in how you feel about yourself and how you approach life.
Okay, so we've talked about dishing attachments, prioritizing self-care, setting boundaries, reclaiming our power, quieting the inner critic.
I'm exhausted.
But how does all of this translate into better relationships?
That's a great question. And one of the key things Glover talks about is recognizing patterns from childhood.
Okay, like how those early experiences can show up in our adult relationship.
Exactly. He says that nice guys often unconsciously seek out partners who reinforce those familiar but unhealthy dynamics,
So it's like we're attracted to people who fit into our pre-existing narratives.
even if those narratives are based on dysfunction.
Mind blown. So, for example, let's say you grew up with a parent who is really critical
You might find yourself drawn to partners who are also critical.
because it feels familiar even though it's not healthy.
Exactly, and that's why self-awareness is so important.
Once you see those patterns, you can start making different choices,
You can choose partners who are emotionally healthy and supportive.
who value and appreciate you for who you are.
Exactly. It's about raising your standards and not settling for less than you deserve.
Okay, this is all super insightful, but I gotta ask, does Glover address the whole sex thing?
He does. In fact, he has a whole chapter on it.
Okay, because that's something that often comes up when we talk about nice guys.
Right? And Glover's approach is really about encouraging men to explore their own sexuality
To communicate their needs and desires openly.
and to reclaim the pleasure they might have been denying themselves.
That's so important because so often sex is treated as this taboo topic, especially for men.
It's like they're not supposed to have feelings or desires.
Exactly. And that can really mess with their ability to connect with their own sexuality.
So Glover's approach is really refreshing. He's saying, hey, it's okay to enjoy sex.
It's natural, it's healthy.
And it's about understanding that true intimacy comes from a place of self-acceptance and vulnerability.
Not from trying to perform for someone else.
Exactly. It's about mutual respect and open communication and a shared desire to create a pleasurable experience for both partners.
This is making me think about how we approach sex and relationships in our culture.
Like we're so focused on performance and achieving some external standard.
That we forget about the importance of genuine connection.
And that's where Glover's approach is so revolutionary.
It's not just about giving you tips and tricks to improve your sex life.
It's about inviting you to embark on a journey of self-discovery.
To connect with your true self and create relationships that are based on authenticity and vulnerability. This is so much more than just a book about being nice.
It's about becoming a more whole and integrated human being.
I love that.
Yeah.
So to think about here. But stay tuned, folks, because in the final part of our deep dive,
We're going to explore Glover's vision for a truly fulfilling life.
all right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. You know, attachments, self-care, boundaries, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
But you mentioned that Glover's vision goes even deeper. It's not just about fixing problems. It's about creating a more fulfilling life overall.
Right, and this is where things get really exciting because when you start breaking free from those nice guy patterns, you create space for passion, purpose, all that good stuff.
That sounds amazing, but how do you actually get there? Like, does Glover give you a step-by-step guide to finding your passion?
Not exactly, but he does talk about how nice guys often sabotage their own success.
Oh, how?
Well, because of things like fear perfectionism or a scarcity mindset.
Yeah, I can see that. So, like, you're afraid to go after what you really want,
Exactly. You're worried about failing or disappointing others or not being good enough.
and then you end up staying stuck.
Right. And he also talks about how we often have these unrealistic expectations about what success will look like.
So then we're disappointed when reality doesn't match up,
So it's about letting go of those expectations and embracing the journey.
with all its imperfections.
Exactly. And recognizing that failure is just part of the process.
Okay, that's a good reminder. So how do we actually put all of this into action? How do we go from feeling stuck to living a life that's truly aligned with our passions?
Well, one thing Glover suggests is reconnecting with your inner child.
Ah, I love that.
That part of you that was curious and playful and full of dreams.
Before the world told you to be a certain way.
Exactly. It's about reawakening that sense of wonder and possibility.
And then what?
Well, then he talks about identifying your core values, the things that are truly important to you,
So you can live in alignment with those values.
and that gives you a sense of purpose and direction.
Okay, so we're reconnecting with our inner child.
Yeah.
We're figuring out our values. What's the next step?
Action. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Just start taking small steps in the direction of your dreams.
Even if it feels scary.
Yeah, because every step you take builds momentum.
And it reinforces that belief that you are capable of creating the life you want.
And you don't have to do this alone.
Oh yeah, it's so important.
Glover really encourages nice guys to seek out support.
Like from a therapist or a men's group.
Yeah, because having that support system can make a huge difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders in your corner.
Exactly. And it's also about being vulnerable, letting people see the real you.
Even with all your imperfections.
Because that's how you create true intimacy and connections.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
I know, right? So much to think about.
We've explored the nice guy syndrome, Glover's strategies for breaking free, and even bigger themes like masculinity and vulnerability.
And ultimately, I think Glover's message is one of hope.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a reminder that change is possible.
That we have the power to create the lives we want.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Ooh, I like this.
What's one small action you can take today to start moving towards a more authentic and fulfilling life?
Because remember, everyone, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And as always, happy reading, happy reflecting, and happy bantering.